All right, good morning, everyone. This will serve as a lecture overview for the Silk Roads as we have been exploring, sorry for the pun, the major economic trade systems for the time period 1200 to 1450. Of course, we had been observing the connectivity that these trade systems would provide for empires on a social, economic, political, and even environmental perspective. As we continue to think about this concept of trade impacting empires, one of the biggest areas we look at is simply how do we witness the movement of goods, ideas, diseases, and people across the region of Afro Eurasia. Now, typically, when we're looking at Silk Road, there is not one singular Silk Road. There are numerous pathways that exist, and many of these pathways are available on a seasonal approach, meaning that, for example's sake, let's say during the wintertime, this path becomes inaccessible due to climate or the topography. Other Silk Roads would be used. Other trade routes could be accessed. Um, it's important to also know that sometimes these roads disappeared. Many times the routes would no longer be accessible because of conflict or war. So there's not going to be one particular Silk Road. It's just a massive network of road systems that connected Afro Eurasia. The other key thing that we wanted to specify is it's not only silk that is expanded here. You will see, of course, silk moving, but you also have huge numbers of different potteries. You have lots of different fabrics like silk, of course, other animals, animal hides, animal byproducts. You have tea, you have gunpowder, you have porcelain, in many cases, other agricultural goods, even people. The way that this system worked was what is simply known as relay trade. So, like a relay race, a sprinter will run a segment of this track, and then they will hand off whatever the item is, in this case, a baton, and then it will move on to the next runner who will continue another segment. And that's kind of what's happening here. Traders will kind of pick up where another trader stops, and they just keep on going until eventually it gets to its end destination. So again, a bigger look at the Silk Road network itself. Notice this one, it basically does not go into the trans-Saharan trade route, but do know that there will be some connectivity issues here, and we will see over time these routes connecting to the Sahara Desert through northern Saudi Arabia into Egypt, and then of course into Africa. Other ways, we do recognize that in Constantinople, many of those Silk Road goods would then be sailed across the Mediterranean Sea, and they would access northern Africa that way. So not always will we see trade items going from the Silk Roads through Egypt. You may just see the parcels going across the Mediterranean Sea and then entering northern Africa that way. Now, with the geographic focus, we kind of notice that there's two different, I guess you could say, levels or different regions of trade here. And it really is important for you to know for this test the differences of Eurasian geography. So all of those empires that are on the outer rim of Eurasia, largely any empire that has water connectivity, they are going to be more suited towards agricultural and luxury items that people are really going to want, but mostly need. Because again, food is a vital human resource. So your outer Eurasian empires, largely again like China, India, anything in Mesopotamia, like what we would see as modern day Iran or Iraq, they are going to have a ton of access to farmed goods, and that equates to a lot of money. Their societies will start off, of course, from an agricultural perspective. Again, Mesopotamia, that is the Fertile Crescent, and they are going to have a lot of goods to transfer throughout the Silk Roads. When we get into the interior of Eurasia, we notice that the climate becomes cooler, colder, the terrain becomes more arduous, more hurdles to cross as traders are concerned, a lot rockier. The soil has lower quality, there's less water access. Those empires are more pastoralist, and those empires have a harder time growing things. Therefore, they are going to spend more time traveling around with their animals and they are going to be the ones who are largely trying to trade livestock for those farmed raised goods, especially grains. So those empires would be like what is modern day Russia, Mongolia, Tibet, Nepal, those areas, any of the stands, like Afghanistan, for example, we would recognize them to be more nomadic and more pastoralist. All right. Now, as far as where trade grows from, it largely is going to come from the empires themselves. Empires desire goods to keep their people stable, and an empire is only as stable as its population. So a population is going to require a ton of goods to stay on par and even keeled. Typically, this is, if we were to consider a key point here, the Mongol Empire had its trade systems cut off by northern Chinese groups, and that is why the Mongols become so aggressive, because their trade connectivity was stopped. So we realize that, again, economics really is what makes an empire strong. And again, we kind of witness here for the Mongols that, Mongols vitally needed trade, and therefore during the height of the reign of the Mongol Empire across Eurasia, one of the biggest orders of business they will focus on is keeping trade going. And that's why we sort of see them as the police of the Silk Roads. And they are also going to rapidly expand culture across Eurasia because of how far reaching their empire truly was. So it's important, again, for you to recognize that really the Mongols during this time period of the 1300s especially, they are going to unlock a ton of trade and economic activity across Eurasia. So of course, we sort of think about what are the key things moving. Again, goods, ideas, disease. We start off by looking at the key goods that are moving. Again, it's not just silk, although there will be a significant amount of silk moving here. But really, you need to focus on the Silk Roads as a highway of major luxury and high-value goods. Okay, it is extremely dangerous to move luxury items, again, even still today. But the main thing is you just want to focus on the fact that all of these goods are highly coveted. For silk, we again notice that China had a major control in the silk producing processes. It is, of course, a luxury item because of its high quality. It's extremely hard to make, and anytime people make things by hand, they are typically going to have higher value. Again, a kind of common similarity with that is a Ferrari or a Bugatti. It's all made by hand, and that's why its value is so much more than a Volkswagen, which was made by machines. And of course, humans help with that, but not 100%. So we see silk as this very, very coveted, unique resource. It's great for all weathers, all different walks of life, and thus becomes a key item moved. We also know that many peasants, many lower class individuals in China will eventually abandon their basic agricultural lifestyles to try their hand at making more money and changing their lives by focusing on high value goods. And so that's why we also see China as almost like a very, very extravagant exporter of goods. There's just so many people who desired to try their best and make money from selling these, luxurious items like silk or very elaborate teas or porcelain. And this did actually work. Many people did find success in doing something where they could change their lives. That could be a unique thing to think about for our test. We have a now socioeconomic issue. People changing their status in society by focusing on changing their economic output. As far as culture is concerned, something that we did cover a lot of in the Indian Ocean overview, remember that trade also helps faiths and different customs exchange and move around the world. And one of the biggest things that we focus on for the Silk Roads is going to be the expansion of Buddhism. Now, I already kind of tickled this in the overview for the Indian Ocean trade, especially when looking at places like Borobudur, but we witnessed the expansion of Buddhism on the backs of merchants coming out of India who really appreciated that on the road, their place in the Hindu caste really was not significant anymore. They were leaving regions where Hinduism was practiced, and now they're able to share the teachings of Buddhism. And so we're going to start to see trade, again, really influencing the expansion of Buddhism throughout Eastern Asia. And that is why typically today you still see a huge concentration of Buddhists in Eastern Asia, like China and Japan, or even down into Cambodia, Vietnam, because of trade pushing resources and these ideas into the area. Now, the big thing about Buddhism that you want to focus on, again, this works for the Silk Roads, this works for the Spice Islands. Buddhism is considered a universalizing or proselytizing faith, which means it is very open to newcomers joining the practices and pursuing the teachings. It is completely voluntary if you choose to convert to Buddhism, but you can again see how very wealthy Buddhists would be able to attract people to come learn more about Buddhism because of the riches that they have. The more money they have allows them to build more elaborate architectures that will help kind of bring people together and give them a place to learn about Buddhism. We see this as a very significant kind of comparison or similarity to Mansa Musa. Look at what we're doing here. We're linking African trade now with Asian trade and the expansion of faith. Mansa Musa uses his wealth to build very numerous numbers of mosques and learning centers in West Africa, in Mali, namely in Timbuktu. And now here we can see wealthy Buddhist merchants doing the exact same thing. They're building huge numbers of temples. Again, key example would be Borobudur. And these locations would allow individuals to come and convert and be a part of the Buddhist community. So we're seeing trade money equating to the expansion of faith. Now, the other big thing that I want to focus on, just like what we see with Islam in Africa, blending together with local religious customs, we see the exact same thing happening in Buddhism in Eastern Asia and in the Spice Islands, where they start to pick up local traditional practices. Like you can see here, they pick up some Zoroastrian practices, Greek practices, right? You're going to see the same thing happening where China starts to sort of mold in some traditional Chinese practices for their Buddhism, and the same for Japan. So that too is another key similarity that I want to show you for the test itself. And of course, in the end, the biggest point that we want to stress, not all good things are going to come from the Silk Roads. You have a ton of exchanges for disease, namely, of course, the bubonic plague, which will in the 1340s decimate huge numbers of society across Eurasia itself, Afro-Eurasia even. You also have the movement of smallpox and measles, which will eventually make its way to the Western Hemisphere and start impacting the Americas once we look at European trade. But the key thing here is to remember that it takes time. It takes a lot of movement of goods and people. Disease, which you are, of course, living in a pandemic right now, but disease does take time to spread. And trade, again, is one of the key ways that we see disease moving. As humans exchange resources and exchange money, they also exchange biologicals, and that will, of course, decimate populations. It changes how people relate with one another. In the end, that is it for our focus on the Silk Roads. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out, let me know. I'm happy to help you in any way I can. Thank you. Have a good day.